Hello, wonderful. This is Sarah, and I'm here with Jennifer Szeghi, and we are talking co-parenting, parallel parenting, parental alienation, all the stuff that we are terrified of when it comes to loving our children well, protecting our kids, putting them first, and knowing what do I need to take seriously? What do I need to let go? All those questions that really circle through our mind. So, hey, Jen, how are you?
I'm doing so good. Thanks, Sarah, for asking. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy to have you. So tell people like your official title and like what you call yourself.
I call myself a parent-child coach who specializes in high conflict co-parenting issues.
And what are just describe a high conflict parenting situation in case there's is that me? Is that not me?
Yeah. So high conflict, of course, conflict is normal in any kind of relationship. Even parents who are still married have conflict, disagreements over parenting. But the high conflict comes in when people continue to go back to the courts to try to resolve issues, and they're not able to make it through those conflict resolution and don't have those conflict resolution skills. And so a lot of times with the high conflict, as a parent coordinator, as well as a parent-child coach, I've seen this, is that usually at least one of the co-parents has a personality disorder or tendencies of a personality disorder. And the high conflict personality disorders are the narcissistic PD, borderline PD, paranoid PD, histrionic, as well as the antisocial.
Yeah, and the reason people usually get divorced in those situations is because they couldn't resolve conflict within the marriage. And then they get out of the marriage and there's still conflict to be dealt with, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And so this definitely gives them an alternative, because one thing that high conflict parents notice is that court, unfortunately, it's very overwhelmed with cases. So that anytime a parent files, if there's something that they would like to resolve, usually it's months before there's even a hearing to try to attempt to resolve it. So I definitely found a need in working with co-parents. I work with co-parents together and giving them that platform to be able to express their perspective. And then I also teach them the conflict resolution skills, as well as holding each party accountable so that they can resolve and make sure the focus does stay on the child. Because in that high conflict, it's so easy to get sucked into that conflict cyclone because it just continues to spin and cause chaos. So helping them stay very focused and making on the child and making sure they don't get swept into that.
Well, and how do you manage a situation? Because the easiest way to resolve conflict with a high conflict person is to just let them have their way every time, which is not necessarily in the best interest of the child for about a million reasons. So how do you navigate that?
Well, it just depends upon what the situation is. But first of all, I work with clients to make sure that when there is high conflict, there's a natural response of human emotions, and to make sure that we first process those emotions and then we get back to the logical part of the brain. That's where we want to make our decisions from. And then with that, what are the skills that we need to apply to the situation? Is it the boundaries, with especially like the narcissistic and the borderline, we really need to put those boundaries in there and not continue to participate. I think, again, when we get pulled into that cyclone, we feel, good humans that a lot of times get preyed on by, the narcissism borderline. We want to make sure that we continue to show up and we continue to try to resolve the problem. But what ends up happening is we keep responding, and we respond with long paragraphs of information to feel like we're defending ourselves, feel like we're doing the right thing. That's actually adding fuel to the fire. And so that gives the high conflict parent more ammo to throw back at us. So it's being able to identify, okay, you responded once, let's go ahead and put that firm boundary up, and you don't need to continue to respond to that. That's not healthy. And so in some ways too, it goes along with that gray rocking to where they're not getting that emotional response that they want and that kind of entertainment, what they thrive off of and what they get energy off of, because it's just putting a firm boundary there and then not responding to the other co-parents.
So with my ladies, I tell them to stick to what problem you're trying to solve. For example, if you need them to bring money to the appointment on Thursday, for example, whatever. And it's like, okay, is 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock going to work better for you? You blah, 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 blah. Okay, is 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock going to work better for you? Is that what you would do as well?
Absolutely. You're just, don't get pulled into all that. And sometimes, having high conflict clients, I have to make sure that I'm practicing these boundaries too, because sometimes I can become the target when I work with the co-parents together. And so it is, okay, we don't want to get drug into that and answering all these questions that they have, because this is the one issue. Is it 2 o'clock or is it 3 o'clock? And sometimes the parents might not even get a response at all. And so you have to say, well, I didn't hear from you, so I'm going to go ahead and assume that this is 3 o'clock and I will see you there at 3 o'clock, and just be done.
Okay, that's a great point.
Trail to show, and I have talked to attorneys about this, as long as you're being reasonable and you have that paper trail, you can go ahead and, make that decision that the shared parenting plan doesn't cover, because no way that it can cover everything from birth or, to 18 years old. So there's so many decisions that parents have to make. And if one parent is just reluctant and unwilling, at some point you do have to go ahead and make that decision and say, well, I haven't heard from you. We didn't resolve this. We can go to you can offer mediation, but if they're not even willing to do that, it's to say, okay, I need to come to this decision in the best interest of our child. Now, it always helps when you do that, if there's decisions you have to make, that you make sure that for things like braces or glasses or things like that, that you get a doctor's opinion behind it, a specialist. So talking to their pediatrician, and I would even go ahead and get that letter from the pediatrician and just keep that in a file, just in case that ever comes up of like, oh, well, she made the decision without me. You have those line of emails, you have the pediatrician's recommendation, and you're covered. Because otherwise they would continue the conflict and nothing would ever get resolved.
Or stonewall the conflict, right? Like you ask a question, can you come at 3? Or are you okay with braces? Or are you okay with therapy? Or are you okay with whatever? And it's like they just pretend they didn't see it. Oh, I didn't see that. Oh, I can't answer that. Oh, I need to think about it. Oh, I need it, right? Which is still controlling the narrative.
Right. So at that point, you would, if you don't hear back, you could say, if I don't hear back from you by this date at this time, I'm going to assume this is what we're doing and this is the plan that we're going to stick to, and then stick to that. Because you're right, they would probably, if you say, I've had clients do this before too, if you say 2 o'clock and I need to know by this date at 2 o'clock, at 2:05, they're like, oh, I just got this. Okay, well, we're still going to stick to the plan, because that is creating so much chaos. Parenting already has so many unknown factors. We don't need to have those kind of unknown factors in as well.
So what is your suggestion for navigating scheduling changes? If someone, is it to prevent that tug and pull? Is it more simple to just say, this is my time, this is what's going to happen on my time, this is your time, this is what's going to happen on your time? Is it better for the kids in general to try to navigate that back and forth and be flexible in trade? I'm sure it's a case by case to some extent, but I know that's a huge conflict within.
Actually, you did answer the question. It is a case by case, assessment on how to handle it. Ultimately, the more flexible parents can be, the better for the children. So the children are not going to miss out on cousins' birthday parties or other family events. And so if both parents can be flexible with each other and know that things are, this may be taking away my time now, but I know in the future something's going to be on his time, then I can go ahead and switch this. However, if it causes so much conflict to do all these changes and the stress of the parents continue to stay increased, then it's not in the best interest of the child anymore, because that stress is more detrimental than being able to go to that birthday party. So in some cases, parents really do just need to stick to what the shared parenting plan says and have that kind of consistency, so they don't have those those negative effects on the children. Because what we do know from divorce, and it was really interesting to see professionals try to figure this out of, initially it was thought divorce would be detrimental to kids. And so when they did the research, they were finding mixed results of like some kids do fine, some kids really struggle. And it was when they looked at that further, it was the kids from the families who continued to have that high conflict were the kids that continued to struggle. So we want to look at in any way diminishing those levels of conflict and stress. And what I tell my clients is a child only needs one adult in their life, positive adult in their life, to be resilient. You make sure that you are that one positive adult for your child. And it's amazing when I work individually and co-parenting, it's amazing to see parents just step up. And they were stuck in that cycle before, and they go ahead and just refocus on themselves, and they hear things that are coming from the other parent, and the child asks them like, well, why does dad say this about about this? And they are able to not make it about themselves, not make it about their hurt feelings, but through the techniques I guide them through of, let's refocus on the child. Well, obviously the fact that your child has brought this to you is really stressing your child out. And how can we help your child emotionally process this so he can relieve it and be able to move on? And ultimately that's what it's about. It's about helping these children get out of that conflict and just have a healthy, no stress because of the co-parent conflicts life. And it is so rewarding for parents to be able to provide that for them, despite what the other parent is doing, because we can't control what the other person does, but we can control how we respond to the high conflict.
So let's talk about parental alienation, which I know is one of your big pieces and your big passions. So can you describe what that is for people? And let's start there. There's so much within that. So yeah, describe what that is for people first.
I was actually very intrigued about parental alienation, and I wanted to dig deeper into it because it really goes against everything in psychology that we would think of. So basically what it is, it's when one parent brainwashes the child into hating the other parents, to put it most simple. Now, it doesn't always even have to be a parent. There have been grandparents who have alienated children from a parent, aunts and uncles. So it isn't just parents who alienate. I do want to point that out. But when I practice as a mental health therapist for children, I remember one of my early cases is the child just hated the mom, and the mom wasn't involved in the picture at that time because CPS had taken the child away from mom, and the child was living with dad, which they did not have a significant relationship prior to the child being removed from the home. And so I was just really intrigued on how much hate this child had for the mom, and there must be something really bad about the mom. But at the same time, I was also had a lot of kids who were in foster care and who were also removed from their parents, but not with, they weren't placed with their biological parent. And those kids wanted to be back with the other parent, no matter what they did, no matter what that parent did wrong. They just wanted to they would take the abuse, they would go, so it was really odd to see, okay, well, what's different about this case in all these other foster cases? And then, even the psychology field has not even fully accepted that this occurs yet. There's not a diagnosis in the DSM-5 that is called parent alienation. Now, there's other diagnosis that you can kind of fit it under, but there's still a lot of kickback on fully accepting and acknowledging that it is possible for a parent to brainwash a child to hate the other parent. And it's extremely heartbreaking because usually it's the parents who, again, these alienators are going to be the high conflict personalities. They're more likely to be the narcissist or borderline. And anytime they feel threatened, so we have a good parent-child relationship, when they feel threatened by that good parent-child relationship, that parent then becomes a target. And they sever and sever and sever the bond between the parent and the child. And a lot of times what happens is the parent does not know what's going on. They may see disrespect for their child. They might see the child is starting to isolate themselves. But until it becomes severe, which is the child stops going on visitations with that parent, or if they do go on a visitation with that parent, they lock themselves in the room the whole time and refuse to talk to that parent. That's when a lot of parents are finally understanding and identifying what parental alienation is. And so I believe as a culture, we need to educate everyone on, what this is. So that way, when they start to see some of the symptoms set in as a parent, they can know how to respond to it. What usually happens, Sarah, in this is, if your child's starting to be disrespectful to you, that, the automatic human response is we want to, give a discipline or consequence and, not really understand where that's coming from. And unfortunately, that just reinforces the alienation, because now when the child goes back to the alienator is going to say, see your mom, see how mean she is? She's just a horrible person. She really doesn't love you. You're not safe with her. And so we have to know of, okay, well, no, it's not okay for you to talk to me like that, but let me understand, what are some of your feelings? What's going on between us? And again, they're strategies I work with the parents on to, step 1, step 2, step 3, to where they can lower the defenses from their child. And then their child starts opening up on what psychological abuse they're enduring at the other parent's house. And then each time they, go back and forth, they can identify, okay, it seems like we're losing connection here. Talk to me, tell me what some of your feelings are, what's going on. And the parent really has to walk a fine line, because we don't want to be the alienators and say anything bad about the other parent. But we do want to make sure that the child feels comfortable enough to come to us and open up and talk about what they're experiencing when they're not with us, if it's, an abusive situation. And so helping repair that bond with the child every time the other parent is trying to sever that bond.
And what are some ways to do that? Is it about making sure you don't get erased from their previous memories? Mm-hmm. Is it about making sure you're asking, something I've told my ladies is, hey, there's no one else here. It's just us. You don't have to be mad at me. Mm-hmm. There's no one else here, because they have that loyalty to the other parent. And then so now they're like feeling like they have to be mean to you mm-hmm. to stay safe at that other house, but just really reminding them, like, it's just us. Mm-hmm. Is that really how you feel? It's just us here. There's no one else watching. It's just us here. Is that kind of something you would suggest? Or
yes, I think that's a good plan, but I think there's definitely steps before that. Like I said, usually they're very defensive. So before they could even receive that message that you're referring to, there's some other steps that take place. Now, a strategy that I use across the board in parenting that I developed myself is called the resiliency strategy. And basically what that is the acronym of so it's a capital THE, and the T stands for tell your story. So have the child tell me what do you what's going on, what are you experiencing, what's kind of get them to give their perspective. And that's the thing about that is it's huge in humankind that we really want to just tell our story in life and have somebody listen and validate. So as they're able to tell their story, that's when the walls start to come down. And then the H stands for the healing process, which is a little bit more, there's a little bit more steps in there. But anytime we have a negative emotion in our culture, we think like we just need to stuff it down and keep moving. But really, we want to teach our kids to emotionally process it and be able to release it. So going through the steps of having them identify, well, what are you feeling? A lot of times we have multiple feelings. How does that feel in your body? And really getting them to spend some time in that feeling so that they can release it. And what's happening in the brain during that process is the activation goes from the amygdala, which is the emotional part of the brain. And once we identify what it is and name it, then the activation goes to the prefrontal cortex, that's our logical. So now we've transitioned our child from the emotional, they're very defensive, they're very mad at us, they've told their story, they talked about their feelings, and now we get them to the logical part of the brain. So then that takes us to the E, which is we want to look to empower our children. So talking with them about, okay, well, here's what here's what you're telling me, here's what the problem is, what can we do together to solve this? And that might be in your situation to say, you know what, Mom, if you could just remind me that nobody's here listening and I can be nice to you, and Dad's not going to know about it. That might be as simple as that. Or it might be that, the child might say, you know what, it makes me feel horrible when Dad says those things about you. What can I do? And if the child feels confident enough and you do some role play with them, it might be helping them be assertive. And they say, you know what, Dad, can we not talk about that while I'm here? Can we talk about something different? So even when the child's with the alienator, they're able to have those skills in their toolbox that they can pull out and use on their own and protect themselves in that situation. I like that strategy because you can adapt it to any kind of problem that comes our child's way. As moms, we really want to just fix it right away. But an important part of it is to let them go through that process, heal, and then learn from it so that when we're not there and they are adults, they are confident in resolving their problems on their own.
So what about when the child starts to use the high conflict parents' words against you? So you have a teenage boy who's 15 and you're manipulating me. You are, you're a gaslighter. I can't trust you. You ruined my life. You this. Is that where you would start with tell me your story? Because I'm thinking of some of those. I'm trying to put it into context.
That's a really good example because that's a really tough situation that many parents do experience. And a lot of times when we hear that, we're like, whoa, we feel overwhelmed. We don't know where this is coming from. How do we respond to this? And so absolutely. But I would also add to that strategy of using the Socratic method is to ask questions. And that helps them tell their story as well. It's like, okay, I hear what you're saying. Can you please tell me how you feel like I'm gaslighting you? Which is interesting because I've seen cases in which they, of course, can't give any information. Yeah. But on top of that, they don't even know what it is.
Right.
So they're using terminology.
Is that something to document as far as a parental alienation coach? Because if someone says you're gaslighting me, okay, tell me how, and they can't, would that be something to document for parental alienation?
Yes, that would meet the symptom of borrowed scenarios. That is part of the 8 behavioral manifestations of parental alienation that we would see in the child. So they are taking, like Dad saying, oh, your mom's a manipulator, a gaslighter. So they're taking his scenario and then using it as their own. So yeah, that would be. And there are people who defend themselves against parental alienation in court and go through some courts. You got to be careful because some judges don't accept it, but they go through those 8 behavioral manifestations of the child and prove like, okay, here's a situation to where the child meets the bar scenario because they used manipulator and they used gaslighting and they didn't even know what it was and they couldn't provide an example. But, going back to that T part of them telling their story is asking them those questions to get them to also critically think for themselves, because what's happening is, in the brainwashing, they're just taking everything verbatim that the alienator is saying. And we don't, we wouldn't want our child to be a victim, not only of an alienator, but even in education, we want them to be able to think for themselves. And so asking them questions so they can think about it and line up everything and say, well, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. I'm saying mom's a manipulator, but I can't even come up with an example. But what usually happens in that is that they won't acknowledge that right then, but we just want to get them thinking on their own. A lot of times they might just walk away from the situation because they're like, they don't have anything to say, but we got to start getting them to go through that process mentally, so that they can start to make the connections of what dad's saying is not accurate, is not lining up. What the normal human response is from parents is usually they become very defensive to where they say, I'm not a manipulator. And then that usually shuts down the child or the adolescents to like, okay, she's not even listening to me, so I'm not even engaged in this. So by questioning, you're starting to get them to start, thinking about, does this make sense? And they're more open to the conversation than responding in a defensive manner.
And one of the things that critical thinking, I know people, what they want to do to protect their kids from parental alienation is create loyalty within their own relationship. And I think it's obviously super important to create a healthy bond between the two of you. But I agree with you that the critical thinking piece is what everyone misses, right? Like, I know it's like, well, what do your eyes see? What do your ears hear? Is that how you think of mom, or is that what someone else said? Those types of things. And I tell my ladies all the time, I said, if your ex is telling you you're crazy, telling your kids you're crazy, you better not give them any data to back that up. You better be pleasant. You better be in a good mood. Not that we have to fake in front of our kids, but the more stable your life is and the more predictable your life is, and then they're saying your mom's crazy, she's this, she's that, it's like, well, mom seems pretty happy and pleasant and stable and good. It's going to be much harder to play that game and pull that flip on you if they don't have any data to back it up, right?
Absolutely. And there are many cases of what you've just talked about. There are many cases in which there is an alienator, but the child does not have those parental alienation manifestations. In fact, I've also seen cases to where the child will turn against the alienator because they see that as that's unhealthy. That's toxic. I don't want to be a part of that environment. I don't like that you talk about my my mom or my dad that way. And so they don't want to go see that other parent. And that somewhat causes some complications while we're trying to accept the parental alienation in court, because I've testified on cases in which it was really truly an issue of estrangement because of the bad mouthing the other parent. The child didn't want to go over there, but yet the bad mouthing parent accuses the healthy parent of being the alienator.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's what makes this so confusing, because it's like, oh, they're and I understand that's why it's so difficult in the court system too, because it's like, well, they're parental alienation, and it's so funny that if you call a dog, but the dog says he wants to be a horse, they say you're parental alienation. And there's some semblance. I talked to a lady yesterday who her husband was having parties and doing drugs and wanting to take her children to situations within drugs, very young. I mean, it's never old enough kids, but I mean, just really your worst case scenario. And there's a real careful balance in that type of behavior is not okay, and your dad's a horrible person, right? And that is something that's not parental alienation, I'm guessing. If it's like, okay, well, we don't do cocaine at this house. I'm not okay with that lifestyle. I mean, which sounds so crazy to me. I mean, it seems so simple, but sometimes in our heads we can get like, well, I don't want to say bad things about their dad. What's your thoughts on that process?
So I try to make any kind of tough situation in life, I try to make it a learning experience. We really don't have to focus on dad per se, but this is a good opportunity for you to talk about drugs with your child. And, even at a young age. So just saying, well, here's some of my concerns about drugs, and here's, it's an unsafe situation. And, it is still my responsibility. I love and I care for you. And it's my responsibility to protect you from that situation, because it's just not healthy. And make sure you're taking the emotion out of it. So it's not you like, oh my gosh, I'm so angry with him that he would even possibly doing this. It's just a very matter of fact. You need to come across as that stable, one positive, role model in their life. And it's just like, well, here's what it is. It's going to be, maybe if they're aware of the drug situation with dad, to say, maybe we can try again, in a couple weeks, but we're just need to make sure everything's safe. And that's all. Do you have any questions? And always open the door for their questions, because you can get a lot of like what they're thinking and the direction that they're going. And if they ask you a question that you're just not sure how to answer, or you feel like I might be biased, if you have that emotional feeling that comes up, it's like, just go ahead and hold off. And you can say, you know what, I'm not sure how to answer that, but let me think about that. I will get back to you. And then just make sure that you do think about it and get back to your child, so that they continue to come to you and ask questions and are open about it. But I think sometimes as parents, we feel like we have to answer right then some of these tough questions. And it's much better just to hold off than to try to undo all the damage that if we say something wrong, that can really harm them.
Do you have any tips for creating helping them through critical thinking if they keep slamming the door of conversation, if they're not willing to talk, and you're still like, okay, they're in their room, they're shut the door, they don't want to talk to me. Where do you go from there?
Okay, so a couple of things. I would first give them some time. And then if there is an issue that you do feel like you need to address, but they keep shutting down, to just say, you know what, this is something that it's really important. I would like for you to go ahead and give me 5 minutes. We can make it through this 5-minute conversation. If they can't make it through 5 minutes, just say, okay, let's do 2 minutes this time and we'll revisit again. So it's kind of giving them some power and control, but negotiation of like, this isn't something we can just shut down about. I'll give you some time, but we do need to come back to this. So I would target that specific situation if they're shutting down, slamming the door, not willing to talk about it. Now, with the critical thinking skills, looking for opportunities that do not have to do with alienation with your child. So when you're sitting down and watching a movie together, and say, well, what do you think about what was just said in that? Does that line up with what you saw in the other part? And so you're starting to exercise that process in a non-threatening way. So that way, when they do have to apply it, when the stress is high and there are threats there, they're able to do it because they practice it in a non-threatening way.
No. And what about trying to stay connected to a child who really has shut you out? Do you send text messages? Do you send gifts? Do you just give up? You have a 17, 18, 19-year-old who has said, I don't want anything to do with you. What do you do from there?
That has to do with each person individually, what they feel like they need to do. And one thing I think is important for parents who are severely alienated to remember is I always say this is a marathon and not a sprint, meaning like a lot of times they put a lot of energy and effort into trying to make the relationship work. And when you're not getting energy back from that relationship, how much that soaks your energy. So it is so important for parents to take breaks. And I see with the severe cases that sometimes they're like, I just want to give up. I can't keep doing it. And to know it's okay to take breaks and not necessarily give up. I've seen some parents who say for themselves after years that it's just for their mental health and well-being that they have had to step back. So I don't ever want to say somebody should be doing something in that, because it does come to that point that I couldn't imagine being in that position, but it's so draining that for their well-being, they do have to take a step back. Now, for the others who, are saying, I'm in this, I'm not giving up. I would still send the text messages. But your text messages have to be very strategic. And sometimes I have sessions with clients of like, they say they want to say something or stay connected, and to say it in ways that would be beneficial to start breaking down those walls. Sometimes parents are just say, hey, I'm thinking of you, I miss you. And those are dismissed. Those are not, they don't get any kind of responses because it really just doesn't get to any emotion. Like, we really want to spark an emotion within our child to get a response, because what is motivation? Motivation comes from that emotion. So whether it be, let's trigger some positive memories and say, hey, I was just thinking the other day, the time that we went and we trained the dolphins, and like, you were so amazing. The dolphin just followed you around, and like really trying to hit on that positive emotion. Then I think there are times that we need to hit on their pain points. I mean, if we think about, you and I are businesswomen, and we know about that, when you target what is your audience pain point. And it's like, when somebody, if we talk about, well, this is who we work with and this is what happens, and people identify with that they think that is exactly me. Somebody finally gets me. These children need to know that somebody gets them. So if we can get in the mindset of like, it's been a while since you and I have talked. I can't imagine how hard this must be, what you're going through, all the changes in high school. You could even target the other things that happen in adolescence, because I don't think it's a really fun time in life. There's so many changes in hormones and all this stuff, but relating to them on that level, because what is very likely to happen is once the child is alienated from the parent severely, that high conflict parent still needs a target. So now that they don't have to actively alienate the child from the other parent, that child is likely to be a target, or that child's needs are not being met. So if we can swoop in there and make that connection with them to say, okay, so, she gets me, I need this, and motivate, use that tough emotion that they're stuffing down to motivate them to make that reconnection.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. What strategies do you have? What if a kid is just spiraling? I mean, I really, there's an actual dangerous, you're really concerned about their mental health, their grades are failing, their personality's changing. You feel like, oh my gosh, they won't even talk to me, and they're failing their classes. And, is that, I know it's a case by case basis, but at some point, is it okay, I need to swoop in and ask them to step up in their life, or is it just let me play nice, hoping they talk to me again? What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are, with anything in life, when there's a lot to be accomplished, we can't really look at the whole picture altogether, because that's just overwhelming. So,
Right.
the long-term goal would obviously be, I want my child healthy. I want them doing well academically, physically healthy, mentally healthy, socially healthy. But, if they're spiraling with grades and with mood and friends, then we just need to think about, okay, well, what is the priority here? What's one thing that we can, change that would be helpful? It may be just listening, just let them, have that catharsis, and like they feel like they have the weight of the world on their shoulders. So it's tough as parents, because you're like, you got an F, we need to get that up. But that grade's not going to come up until your child's okay. And so meeting your child where your child is, and is, say what, and make it a team, make sure you're not, I'm your parent, this needs to be done, but it's like, be the supportive parent of like, okay, this doesn't seem like your characteristic. You were really concerned about having higher grades before. How can I be supportive? How can I be helpful to you? And that is so what they need, but you're still holding them accountable as well to say, we're not just going to overlook this here either. So picking out what is the most important thing to help them eventually get back on track. And sometimes as parents, we think about things and it seems like a crisis, but if they fail a class in high school, they can still go on to be a doctor. Like that is not, if we can just kind of reframe and really look at things for what they are and not get overwhelmed and not get in that crisis moment ourselves, to just say, okay, one thing at a time, we will get to the goal point, but we have to break this down and make sure we continue to accomplish and, get things done, reconnect with social relationships one at a time.
Yeah. And so what about somebody trying to navigate the legal system with this, or you have a parenting coordinator or something, and it's just this like sheer despair of like, and I see this all the time. He has broken the parenting plan 500 times in the last 2 years. And, they get advice from the parenting coordinator, like, well, he's not going to change. So we just have to work around it. What are the expectations within that process
within the court process? Again, not to continue to say the same thing. It depends upon the magistrate and the judge on your case. One thing I wish, and I'm working on with some guardian ad litems, is I would like for the courts to give more consequences when there are contempts. And I'm still baffled on how the court can just let so many parents not follow this court order. I find it, so disrespectful for the courts, but yet they won't implement any kind of consequences to motivate the parent to continue to follow the parenting plan. And in fact, I got laughed at by an attorney last year because in my parent coordination report, I wrote, this behavior is not going to change until there's some consequences. And I think what needs to happen is that when one parent violates the shared parenting plan, they should have to pay the other parent for the inconvenience. And I was just laughed at by that. But I think that would deter so much, especially in the high conflict situations, because the narcissist, the borderline, the other high conflict personality disorders, they are not going to want to pay anything to that other parent. And in the long run, think about how many conflicts would be dissolved and wouldn't even occur if the parents were forced to follow this shared parenting plan.
Which is just so disheartening for the women that I talk to, and they just work so hard to like follow the rules, right? And it's like, I'm following the rules, I'm following the rules, I'm following the rules. It's like, I have a binder this thick of how he has broken every rule in the book. And I say it to my parent, and have you seen that too with either guardian ad litems or parenting coordinators, and just like, well, what do you want me to do about him? And it's like, but it's from the women's perspective, and I'm thinking of 3 women I've talked to this week, and it's like, but it's your job to do something about it. What do you mean?
Yeah.
Like,
so I can testify to that personally, since I am a parent coordinator. I was told when we first were going through the training that we could write decisions that would charge the other parents, and then they changed that. And so it, unfortunately, the way it is set up, parent coordinators can't enforce it. They should be given that. If they could enforce it, if we could write decisions to say, okay, he's in contempt, yeah, let's go ahead, and that would resolve it. So I see both sides of that, because I'm thinking of my very first case. I remember I kept contacting the magistrate or the parent coordinators because I'm like, he's not doing this. What can we do about this? And nothing. And we just actually had to wait for the parent to file against the other parent. And then I testified to, yes, this is how everything went down. So it for the cases I've been on, which I have been one who's very adamant and sticking to whenever they call, making sure I follow through no matter how busy I am. But I have found it, and the clients have found it beneficial, because when it does make it in front of the magistrates, it's no longer he said, she said. It's a professional in the middle to say, Judge, here's what's going on. Yes, this parent is not giving the other parent their parenting time. And yes, I have concerns that this parent is interfering with the relationship between the child and the other parent. There's a lot of adapting that needs to occur, but I do think, as compared to having nothing, or at least, the way I approach parent coordination, it is helpful. But I know just with anything, sometimes I hear people say it just depends upon who you get as a guardian ad litem or as a
teacher or a doctor or a lawyer or of course. So through your work is my last question. Through your work, what's your favorite tip? You may kill me for asking this, for getting a high conflict person to be better, to step up, to do the right thing?
Or so from the coach perspective or from the co-parent to co-parent?
From a I don't know. If you're co-parenting and it's like, oh my gosh, I really want, Johnny to be able to go to his singing recital on Thursday, and they're not wanting to do it. Is there any tips or strategies you have for getting them to do the right thing, which I know is a terrible question, because when people ask me that, I'll be like, no.
That's a really good question. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to just use some lay terms here. The best advice that I can give you is to stroke their ego, like to buffer them up a little bit and say, hey, thanks for, you did such a great job on this with Joey. By the way, can I have him on this date? And in return, I'll go ahead and give you this date. And so to think about the way the high conflict personality comes out, again, when they're threatened, that's when they're going to come out with the high conflict and the aggressiveness. So if we can lower their defenses and, make them feel good about themselves, then we're more likely to get that response. And that's a hard thing to do. That sounds like, easy, but it's really hard when there's so much emotion behind that. But really that's going to be your best chance to getting your co-parent on board with what your goal is. And I also, just to kind of piggyback off that, is don't forget what your goal is. When you go into a parenting issue, write down what that goal is so that, whatever you're doing, you're working towards achieving that goal instead of working towards, I'm just going to prove him wrong from what he just said. And
horrible. That's what I always say, like, what problem are you trying to solve? And if the problem you're trying to solve is for them to accept responsibility, admit mistakes, well, it's just a terrible problem to solve, because you might as well just bang your head on the wall, and that creates that storm that you were talking about, right? It's like, oh, then you're engaged in the conflict, then you're defending yourself, then you're this, and really digging into what problem you're trying to solve, which is doing right for your kids. Setting up that appointment for braces or whatever it needs to be, getting their insurance taken care of, getting them taking the ACT, these types of things, thinking about what problem you're trying to solve rather than trying to prove them wrong or trying to defend yourself, right?
Yeah, because they will spend all of their time like it's a hobby to come back at you. And I know the women that you work with, the very high functioning, successful women, we don't have time for that. So as tempting as it is, it's just like, we'll just ignore that and stick to what our goal is.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. Well, Jen, tell people where they can find more out about you.
Perfect. So I have a website. It's www.successfulparentingllc.com. And so I have all my information there. And you can also schedule a free strategy call through my website as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for helping us on our journey to becoming toxic person proof.
I love it. Thanks, Sarah.